name is Simrah Ali. I am a Queen's College student. Thank you for joining us.
So today we have three great speakers who will be speaking out against racism, the census, discrimination, how it all ties together. We also ask that if anybody who is comfortable with sharing their own experience with racism, please let us know. And if we have time at the end, we will allow for people to share out. Another memo, this event will be recorded and most likely be posted on YouTube. So if you have any objections to that, please let us know in the chat. You can private message me and we will let everybody else know. So to start off, we have Mr. Anthony Miranda, who will be speaking about racism, discrimination. He's, I'll let him speak for himself, the man himself.
Okay, are you ready? Hi, you want me to speak now or you want me to wait till you finish your...
No, go ahead, yeah.
Okay, again, my name is Anthony Miranda. I was a candidate for Queensborough president. I'm retired chief from the Administration for Children's Services, chief of police, and retired sergeant from the New York City Police Department. So I have been involved in civil rights activity for the last 40 years, filing discrimination lawsuits and complaints against the city of New York, as well as other states across the United States on behalf of both law enforcement officers of color and of community residents that are abused by police practices. That's this way as an introduction. Do you want me to, is there a question or you want me to, how would you like me to proceed?
Well, we have a few questions we can ask you.
Okay.
So, what is your definition of racism? And then after, what is your definition of discrimination?
Okay. Racism and discrimination, again, so I have been trained in both EEO law and in EEO investigations, that's equal employment opportunity law and investigations. And I had to go through that training because when the police department was discriminating against law enforcement officers, us, the officers of color, we felt the need to arm ourselves with the same training that the police department allegedly was giving its members to represent us. Racism, listen, you can be a racist and not discriminate, right? And then it's just kind of hard to kind of identify, but racism kind of like make judgments on people based on the color of their skins. Discrimination means that you have an unlawful, illegal, desperate impact on people based on the color of the skin. And when I say this is that because we had many officers who joined the police department who had hanging nooses tattooed on their arms and things like that. And you see that across some law enforcement agencies. You see Confederate flags and other symbols of discrimination. But it doesn't necessarily mean that while they're in uniform, they committed the acts. They were discriminating against people. They may have been racist, but they did their jobs in an impartial fashion. So that's just one area. So when we talk about, again, I can talk to it from two different perspectives, right? One is I decided to run for Queensborough president's office because of the issue of discrimination and desperate impact, right? And sometimes it's not just people who don't look like us or some of our own people are just as damaging as people that are not our nationality. And I say that because we have gatekeepers, people who don't change policy or procedures. And they hold these gates and these positions for so many years and they wait for a tragedy to move them. So in this recent cases, you have a movement based on a tragedy that occurred, a murder that occurred that was caught on camera. But the fact was I had these conversations many years before that, almost close to 30 years ago, we filed a class action lawsuit against the police department and they settled it out of court for close to $6.8 million, $26.8 million to minority officers. And I felt like this, let's kind of bring it to current terms. What you had was the murder of Floyd, and then you had Eric Garner case, which was 6 years ago. We were out protesting, exposing the illegal police practices back before Eric Garner. And it took all these elected officials, again, many of them are people of color who just didn't move the dial. They just would not move the agenda forward. And you took another murder for us to start moving things, and then they changed the conversation, right? What was the initial protests about? The initial demonstrations were about police reform and police accountability. The conversation quickly changed into an issue of race. They took us into an area that had no results. And why I say that to you? Policy and procedure, we can have an immediate impact on. We can change the police department's disciplinary process. We can empower CCRP. We can appoint a special prosecutor to oversee the police department. We can even appoint civilian control of the police department. That's about rules, policies, and procedures. Immediate impact, immediate change. When you had other people change the conversation, it was never illegal for standard by to film police, to videotape police officers. That was never against the law. It was already against police procedures to choke an individual and restrict the breathing apparatus of a person, right? It was already against police department, especially here in New York City, police department's rules and regulations. Now they made it a crime, but what they didn't change, they did not change the disciplinary process, right? That's policy and procedure. They changed the law, but they did not change the oversight of the police department, which means that this will repeat itself. And we'll go to the same situation all over again because we have not changed the apparatus of the police department. You have the census has to deal with detailing our communities, right? To be able to get the resources and the things that we need as a community. Our elected officials can have and should have had a major role in that community outreach and ensuring that every single block had participation in this process, but we don't. They count on two things. They count on lack of voter turnout and lack of participation from the public. Why? Because an active voter base, an active community base means that they have to be accountable to a larger group of people. So when you're asking people to be accountable for what they get elected to do, then you're also asking people to empower communities and give power back to the people. So we have not engaged in that process at all. And again, I'm going to a number of different topics, and I'm sure you're going to have questions afterwards. But part of why I ran for Queensborough president was that there are over 4,000 seats here in the borough of Queens. And many of you are students, young adults working. There are 4,000 seats here in the borough of Queens alone, called county committee seats. You can get elected to that position by getting 20 to 25 people from your block to sign a petition for you. That will give you a seat at every political table, every conversation about the changes of policies and procedures and laws in our communities. It will empower you to have a seat at the table. You vote on the policy for the Democratic Party, and you also vote on who becomes the county committee, the Democratic Party chairman. Two very powerful positions. They don't have to be elected officials. You can pick anybody from the community, any community leader, to lead those positions. So our drive was to move 4,000 people and put them at the seat of every political conversation that goes on in our communities. And these political conversations impact on the level of services that we receive, the resources that come into our community, and how we're able to help each other. So this has been a movement. It's a part of, again, if you want to look at real results, I hate when people get exercised. Our community was exercised into demonstrations and walking and doing these things, right? But voter turnout still in the borough of Queens was still less than 10%. So imagine we had millions of people marching. We activated the largest base in history, but we could still not turn that into actual voters who would turn and decide who would represent them. So this process that we engage in has to engage the political structure and has to be empowering for everyday people like you and I. Again, so I represented law enforcement officers. I started organizing in the New York City Police Department, representing officers of color. One of the first cases that we researched on that we stood out against was the death of Anthony Byers caused by Francis Lavoti, a chokehold. I don't know if you remember that case, but look it up. A football hit a police car. The officers ended up choking him out and he ended up dying. The only officer to speak out was Daisy Boyer, a Latina police officer. And at that time, the police department said they could not protect her. They could not guarantee her safety, not against the community, but from other officers in the rank and file. Our organization was the first ones to come out and support her. We had officers responding to all her calls for service while she was out in the street until the day she was out in the street as extra backup. Even when they came from precincts, neighboring precincts, they would just show up whenever she had a call for service because we didn't want anything to happen to her. When the police department tells you that they can't keep their officers safe from other officers, then we already know there's a problem and exists a long time. New York One just recently did a great program about racism. That's what it was. And they got all the police chiefs to turn around and say how they work with our community and how they knew there was always a problem. But they didn't ask them the hard questions. If you knew all these years, these are not chiefs, they have 20 years, 30 years, 40 years on the job. We have filed hundreds of lawsuits by officers of color and community residents against the police department. Not once did we have any one of those individuals get up and say in court that the police department was wrong or that it was engaged in discrimination. Right? So these are hard questions, and that we have to push our elected and our representatives to be able to ask people. So I said a lot of things just now. I'm gonna turn it off a little bit so you guys ask me some more questions, and then I'll be able to answer you.
Thank you so much. So another question that we have, it's 2020. Why do you think that there's still such a prominent issue with racism today?
I think there's a couple of things. One, we failed to acknowledge that we had a problem all this time. And the second problem is, again, we don't engage in actual change. And I said, this is where it impacts our families. Policies, procedures, resources, actual impact, not ideological changes, but actual impact changes. What's the issue? This movement was not about hiring more African Americans, right? That's not what the movement was about. The movement was about accountability and change, and that didn't happen, reform. What their response was, and think about all the agencies, including our good mayor and the police commissioner, now they highlight on the news every person of color that they're now promoting and taking over different leadership roles. Well, that doesn't solve the problem because the system in place has not changed. So appointing somebody at the head of the table without changing the mechanism by which we receive the services by which we have access means that nothing's changed. I mean, somebody got a job, a well-paying job, congratulations. But when it comes down to everyday people and seeing the impact of these changes, we don't get to see it. So that's the caution and that's the fight that we have, right? I mean, the problem wasn't that George Floyd didn't die because we had too many police officers. He died because of illegal police activity. So the response to have less officers is not a response to the change or to address the actual issues that occurred. We wanted accountability. We wanted transformation. Doesn't mean less officers. It means that when an officer does something wrong, he needs to be charged and prosecuted, taken from the rank and file, and it needs to be, whatever the legal system tells us is possible needs to be fully implemented. But that's seen at all. So we're not talking about, symbolic changes. The city council had absolutely no authority over the release of police officers' records. Had none, but they wrote a proclamation, they got on the news, they exercised, and everybody reported them. Thank you, city council. Nothing, because they had no authority over that process. And that process, although everybody yelled about it, yay, but they should have never had it to begin with. So it's a shallow victory when police officers should have never had that level of protection to begin with. And then to say that it only impacts maybe less than 10% of the police department. So that, again, is not the systemic change, the reform, the accountability that we were looking for. They chose to address cursory issues, but they have failed to address the real issue which impacts our community, illegal police quotas. We've been saying this for over 40 years. It for over 40 years. There are illegal summons quotas. There are illegal arrest quotas imposed by the police department that require every officer to make at least one arrest every quarter and to give out anywhere between 25 and 35 summonses on a monthly basis. The police department now calls it performance goals. It's called an illegal quota system. Mathematically, it's impossible that every police officer in the entire city of New York, miraculously at the end of the month, whether you're working the day shift or the night shift or in between, whatever wherever you're assigned to, you all end up with the same exact numbers. That's called an illegal quota system. And the same mandate, those are for uniform officers in the street. They have the same mandate for any officer in the specialty unit, whether they're in narcotics, whether they're in plain clothes, well, it doesn't matter the detail. They all have a certain number. If you want to maintain your status in these special assignments, you have to go out and make X amount of arrests. These are the real issues that impact our community. These are not calls as a result of emergency calls. These are predominantly the results of self-initiated contact in our community. And that's what we needed to get control of. The self-initiated contact. Why? Because police officers are out there doing what? Trying to hit these illegal quota systems each and every day, and they're causing them to have these negative impacts at a greater number in our communities. And the other fact of the matter is exactly the same. If you go to a predominantly white community, you'll still have all your arrests and your summonses predominantly given to people of color. So it doesn't matter what community you go into, it's still going to be the poorer and people of color who receive the majority of the summonses and get arrested most often in any of our communities. Again, so these are factual information. That's why I want to arm you with facts. There's undisputable facts that when you question people in authority about these issues, they have no response. Go ahead. I got to take a break. Sometimes I get passionate about what I speak about because I've been doing it for so long. But in that, I want to pause always to see and make sure if I prompted any questions from anybody or any things that you really want to know about that you didn't know about before, because this is a great opportunity to get the real information.
No, definitely. There's a question in the chat. It says, for those who want to make change, what are some ways we can help?
Okay, so one is, I want to tell you something else. Every time that you see police officer involved shooting or a dramatic incident, the first thing you always see the police department is issue. No, let me go back to the question. The question is, how can you help? The question of helping is getting strictly involved. One is, I don't know if any of you know what a triple prime voter is. Triple prime voter. That's a person generally in our communities. It's the elderly person because they vote in every single election, which is either, if it's a dog catcher, judge, doesn't matter what it is, they vote every single time. You have to get to the point of becoming a triple prime voter, because every time you talk to an elected official, they check to see your status. And if you're never voted before, you get the secretary. If you're a triple prime voter, believe it or not, you get the actual candidate most of the time, or you get the chief of staff to address your issue. So always target becoming a triple prime voter. And that means consistently voting in every single election, regardless of who's running for office. You have to vote each and every time, because no decision is a decision. So, but you have to exercise your right to vote. That's the first thing, triple prime voter status. The second thing is, if you're interested, it doesn't matter, I'm focusing on Queens, right? But the county committee seat exists throughout the entire city. It's part of the Democratic Party Constitution, the Republican Party Constitution, Independent Party Constitution. They all have the same position. It's called county committee. You can run for those positions wherever you live at. I will help you engage in that process to tell you exactly what you need to do. 99% of the time, all you have to do is get the petition, get 20 of your neighbors to sign for you who are all registered in the same party, and nobody runs against you. And when nobody runs against you, you automatically win the position just by submitting the petition. So we ran close to 50 people in this election cycle for county committee and judicial delegates. So the judicial delegates are the people who choose which judges are going to get promoted. Because part of the other process that people complained of is that the judges were not reflective of our communities, and they were abusing the process, right? So how do we fix that? We put ourselves into position to be the ones who are voting on what judges are getting promoted in our community. So they look like us and they have the same points of view that we have. The criminal justice reform process for the jails didn't address the problem, right? It went to the jails where you get people incarcerated, the end results. And we went to the beginning, which is bail. That's what we did. We went to both ends of the equation. Not one reform mechanism had to deal with the actual process in the middle, which would have forced those judges to hear the cases in a timely fashion, not have the same amount of adjournments, open discovery. All that was in the middle, the meat and potatoes of what would impact our communities would have been, how do we fix the problem in the middle so that we don't have people unfairly incarcerated in jail for when they're not found guilty of anything. And then we can quickly find out on the other end whether somebody actually committed a crime because it's open discovery or not, whether they had the evidence to convict somebody or not. And if you did, you let them go. But if you did, then you let the process take over. We went to both ends. We didn't address the meat. And the meat of the criminal justice system that impacts us, it still hasn't been addressed. So again, this is where we change the conversations and make sure that's how you can be involved. Volunteer at every elected official's office. Make sure you're part of the database for calling out on issues. They respond to when the community calls a number of times. So I tell people, when you have problems, make sure you're calling the 311 number, you're calling your elected official's office. I asked half of the people what district they lived in. Many of them didn't even know, and many of them didn't even know who their elected officials were, whether the city councilman, the assemblyman, the state senator, the congresswoman. They didn't know. So if we're not engaged, then how can we hold them accountable? Right? And then if we, like I said, I tell you, if you get focused on the 4,000 seats that I said, because if we take all 4,000 of those seats, it only takes 900 signatures to qualify a person to get on the ballot. County committee people then decide who will be our district leaders, who will be our state representatives, who will be our city council. It won't be decided by political machines. It will be decided by the 4,000 people that have a seat at the table, because when they go back to their blocks, and they represent a minimum of 10 to 20 more people that vote. So change the dynamics, change the conversation is by each and every one of us getting a seat at the table. And then this process is going to be ongoing for the next 2 years at least, until we fill all 4,000 seats. So again, whether you're in Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan, doesn't matter. Whether you live outside of New York and Long Island or other states, it's the same exact position. We can guide you through the process, help you get there. It's not that complicated. You just have to be willing. And imagine that if you had 4,000 students from the CUNY system, all elected to office, what impact would you have about the cuts that are being made to the colleges? What impact would you have before politicians decide they're going to do something against the students and disempower our next generation of education? How much impact would you have? A lot. And then when they don't respond, they don't do as you ask of them, guess what you can do? Next cycle, you vote them out of office. They don't get to inherit it. They don't get to pass it on to family members. None of that stuff. They don't get to change to defeat term limits. We had term limits. Why? So we wouldn't have career politicians. So what did they do? They decided to exchange positions with each other. That wasn't why it was designed to do. It was designed to push in new leaders, new people, new potential. And we're still in that struggle. So how can you help? Get involved in this entire political process, county committee seats. Look, not only the college-based university organizations, but you can also, if you want to see what law enforcement officers are doing, join some of the fraternal organizations. My organization is called the National Latino Officers Association. We work hand in hand with the Grand Council of Guardians and 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care. And we have open meetings. We invite the public to our meetings because they're the ones who protected us when we started. When we first started our organization in 1996, the only reason we survived was because of the community support that we had. We were investigated by everybody. They had surveillance on our families. They had tapped our phones. They did everything they possibly could to derail our organization. They did not want us out there, both standing with the community, working with the community, or informing community about their rights. That's what they didn't want. So again, when I see the New York One, Bleeding Heart, and the Chiefs and all these guys, so when I have 40 years on, I knew there was a problem. Well, too late, too bad. You should retire, right? Because the problem has been existing for over 40 years already. The entire time that you've been here, been as a leader in the police department, and you failed to address it. Not once did they speak up and side with any of the lawsuits that minority officers or communities of color have, lawsuits that have been filed by families who have been victimized. Not one of these chiefs that got out there and said, yes, we had a problem. It was the police department's fault that this happened. So when they get on these commercials and they get on these TVs and they do these interviews, they're disingenuous and they're meant to calm the community. Well, again, the same way we hold our police leadership accountable, hold every one of our politicians accountable. I sat at rallies. You know, they stopped letting me speak at rallies. You want to know why? Because I was speaking behind the politicians, the ones that got up there and said things like, well, I'm really motivated by the movement now. Now I'm impassioned. Now I feel invigorated. I said, well, where were you? I didn't need your passion. I needed you to make the changes 40 years ago. Because if 40 years ago you made the changes, we wouldn't have had the problem we have today. So I wasn't moved by the "I'm glad you're here" speech. And when I told people that, I said, listen to these guys that are standing here, because there are people of color just like you and I, again, that stand here for over 30 years, some of them 8 years, 12 years. What has changed for us? This is not the first time we're asking for police reform. This is not the first time we're fighting against discrimination, not only in the police department, but in most city agencies. These are not new topics, but we have a great movement right now that we can't lose. We can't lose it. We cannot lose this movement right now. Because you know what's going to happen? It's going to take somebody else to die before we end up getting back on this agenda again. And I say, stay focused on the questions when you guys are out there. It's reform.
Hello guys, this is Justin McGowan, the creator of this channel and one of the hosts and founders for this event. I'm here to let you know that while Anthony Miranda was talking about his stories of racism and all of that, the WebEx just shut, out of nowhere, just shut down. And because of that, we were forced to go back to the link and put the meeting back on again. So a lot of things that he said were cut out. So I apologize for that inconvenience, but we got the meeting back. So please stay with us for this. Thank you, and I once again apologize for any inconvenience.
Looks like us be there. And none of this was given to us, right? The right for us to be police officers was as a result of lawsuits from the original Hispanic officers when they had the height requirements. And I mean, there was all kind of discrimination when it didn't allow and disqualify. To this day, they still qualify record numbers of officers of color from joining the police department. So we fought for the right to be here. People sacrifice for officers of color to be able to be in the rank structure, to be able to be a part of our community. I never lose sight of that. We didn't get here on our own. Everything that we've been able to do is the result of somebody else who sacrificed before us and opened those doors. And it's our job to keep those doors open and to make sure that more people and more people like us are entering the law enforcement agencies, but not only as officers, but becoming the chiefs of police and becoming the policy makers and the decision makers in the agency. And those are the changes that we look for. Again, so, and I tell you the following, remember, accountability, reform. Sometimes, you know, it's not just that we have a Latino or an African-American that was appointed to the highest position, because when the system doesn't change, then those people can't have the impact that they're supposed to have either. So fight for the changes. Police officers of color have been struggling for a long time internally, looking for the community's help and saying, please help us inside here, because we can make a difference and we can help. But there's been a disconnect. Not all police officers are bad, but the bad ones do need to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. But the good ones, you know, it's like throwing out the baby with the bathwater is the expression, right? You don't destroy good officers who have been doing this work for so long and been in a place to help community residents on a daily basis and be role models. You don't throw them out with the people that are doing the wrong thing. Bad policies and bad procedures are just that. Change the leadership, change the accountability, change the disciplinary structure, and then you have a different. So we're looking forward to those changes. I'm going to be here listening to the conversation as we go forward. And if there are any additional questions, please type them in. And when I get a chance to come back on, I've always give out my cell phone number. If anybody after this has questions and you want to talk to me directly, you're more than welcome to either email me or call me directly. I give up my phone number since I started the campaign, right? And that doesn't change. And if you have a pen and paper, or they'll send it in your group chat, it's 646-772-3728. That's my cell phone directly. If I'm not engaged in talking to somebody, then I generally pick up that phone myself. And my email is Miranda, MIRANDA .Anthony@AOL.com. I'm still one of the few people that still use AOL. Okay. So again, thank you. And this, I'll look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. Thank you so much, Mr. Miranda. We really appreciate your time. We're going to turn it over now to Miss Kathleen Daniel, if you would like to give a little bit of an introduction about yourself.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So I was joking when we came back online that, you know, Brother Miranda, he dropped the truth too hot. That's why they had to cut us off. He's talking too much about pushing power. And so, you know, power pushed us right offline. So thank you for that. Tough act to follow. Definitely tough act to follow. So my name is Kathleen Daniel. I'm the field director for the Mayor's NYC Census 2020. campaign, and it is a grassroots campaign to get people to do the census. I know I said mayor, I said agency, I said grassroots. We are making history. This has never existed before in the city of New York. New York City has never done anything to promote participation in the census ever. And so the mayor and the city council put together a combined $40 million to create the program that I'm going to talk to you a little bit about. So I have to do the thing that I hate doing, that is the toughest to do, is to tell you something about me. Why is this woman sitting here talking to me about anything, and why is she running this grassroots campaign? Unlike Mr. Miranda, I'm not going to date myself, but I am born, bred, and boldly Brooklyn. I am a career organizer before I understood that that was a career, because I have always had this much melanin. I am the first American born of Haitian immigrants, sac passe everybody, in my family. And so there has always been a need to push power from the moment I realized that I was being treated differently, and then figured out why. When I realized why people yelled at my mother and spoke really slowly, even though she speaks 5 languages fluidly. When I realized when I got to college that, whoa, everybody on this line for, financial aid, whose financial aid particularly got screwed up, looks like me. And then all the people going in and out of the bursar, 1, 2, 3, didn't look like me, right? So from the time you realize there is a difference, I think many of us make a choice without even thinking about it to become activists and to organize, because really, what? Seriously? That can't be, right? It just doesn't make sense to people who have common sense why there is such a difference. And so I started out with the PERG, NIPERG, well water issues and recycling before it was the law, dating myself just a little bit, but I'm not going to give you too much. And then continued with organizing around education, because, when I got married and had children, I realized I'm giving up my children, the most important people in my life, in my world, for whom I live my life, for 40 hours a week, to people involved in a system that I had no control over. And I've been paying into the education system, the public education system, since my very first job, when I had work study and 14 years old and got my working papers, and taxes were coming out of that, because our tax dollars go into the public education system. And so I had to become an activist. And when someone offered me an actual job as an organizer, I said, what, organizing closets? And they were like, no, we want you to organize parents. I was like, PTA? They were like, no, we want you to get parents to register to vote and help change the school system and make sure that our kids are getting their fair share of resources and the best teachers and the best textbooks. And I was like, people get paid for that? Really? Yeah, I'm in. And then imagine years later when I'm telling my parents that I'm leaving my job as director of outreach for Brooklyn Borough President Eric L. Adams, to take on a temporary job to help people do the census as an organizer. And they just kept asking me 2 things. Organizing what? The mayor's house? It's like, no. And they were like, temporary? I'm Caribbean. We're not supposed to take a job that's going to end. So my mother keeps saying, so wait, your job is going to finish? It's going to stop? I don't understand. The city doesn't stop. And so I'm still trying to explain that, right? So hence, I barely talk about my resume and what I'm doing, because what I'm doing right now is sacrilegious. And I'll tell you a little bit about my census story. We all have a census story. I worked for the Federal Census Bureau as an enumerator, knocking on doors in 2000, and I paid for my wedding. I worked for the Federal Census Bureau in 2010 as a group quarter supervisor, counting people in group homes, detention centers, foster care, and this sort of, and shelters, this type of living arrangement. And I paid for my divorce. So happy. And now I can tell you, while I'm working for New York City, running a grassroots census organizing campaign to teach people, inform them, and agitate them into doing the census, that there has never, ever been an accurate census. I can swear to it. It's never happened, and here's why. When the enumerators come knocking on your door, and I have trained thousands of enumerators in my federal census career, when the enumerators come knocking on your door, if you are not home, they have absolutely the right, it is their training, to go to the next person that they see, or the bodega, or the person on the stoop that you don't talk to, and say, hi, you know those people, this window right here? Do you know how many people live there? And that person, the enumerator, doesn't know that you don't talk to this guy sitting on the stoop, because he never helps you with the groceries. He's always in the way, and he's always playing his music too loud. And this guy's gonna turn around and go, oh, them, Nobody. They ain't nobody. And the enumerator will say, nobody, thanks, vacant. And your voice has just disappeared for 10 years. Just like that. You are not there for the next 10 years of every resource that's being doled out. It's like if you just cooked dinner and you were really happy with what you put together. You got your arroz con pollo, you got your little, your salad ready, you're ready to go. And then somebody says, you gotta come, you gotta run with me. And now you're no longer at the table. And by the time you get home, your whole family ate everything you cooked and left you nothing. They're like, but you weren't here. You disappeared just like that. Look how easy it is to lose your voice. So let me tell you what the city is doing. We have a four-pronged approach to the the census program. We have the field team, which I'm going to talk to you about last because that's my favorite, because that's my team. And that is the team that many of you CUNY Census Corps students are with. So kudos to you. Thank you for doing this. We have a grants program, 157 different organizations were given grant money to the tune of $16 million because these were the tried, true, trusted messengers, the validators in every community. And speaking over 80 different languages. And so we had them, empowered them, funded them so they can go out into the community and do in-reach with the people they already work with and outreach for the people that they did not know. We gave $1.4 million to the libraries because the libraries were to serve as pop-up centers. And then we got COVID-ed, like I like to say. And then the COVID pandemic came. So that has greatly stalled our pop-up sites, but the libraries have been, as partners, doing a ton of virtual events with us. And now they are just beginning to reopen. 8 branches are opening across the city. Yes. So we cannot wait to get them set up. We also have a multi-million-dollar advertising campaign, and you will see our digital ads. And I'll be happy to share some in the chat, where we have every walk of life, every kind of New Yorker, and they're delivering really like edgy messages. We also have our PSAs going. I don't know if you guys have seen Cardi B, who is saying mi gente presente. I don't know if you've seen AOC, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, and Lin-Manuel Miranda. I don't know if you've noticed Seth Meyers out there. And I don't know if you've seen Alicia Keys sitting by her piano and talking about the census. And there's more to come, because we need everybody involved in doing the census. Now, I told you about the 3 prongs, and here's my favorite part. We also have a field team. We've got over 30 people that are out there working these streets, working the phone lines, and running what we call NOCs, Neighborhood Organizing Census Committees. And these are local chapters, because you know that everyone in their own neighborhood knows where the best bodega is, where you can get a real parking spot without getting a ticket, and you know who is really engaged and involved on your blocks. And that's where the census happens. That's where the impact of the census is, right on your block, right outside of your front door. And so we have separated the city into 250 neighborhood organizing census committees. And if you don't know about it, that means you're not involved. So go to nyc.gov/census and get involved. You can do it from the comfort of your own home and call your neighbors. If you speak another language other than English, then come on, join us, and we will carve out a neighborhood for you where the people speak predominantly the language that you speak, and then you can speak the language of the deal and help get the word out. Because any of you who's ever been to a church will tell you, you've heard it before, the scripture says our people perish for lack of knowledge. And this is true no matter what you believe about New York City and the census. So now I'm not going to be able to stop talking until we have the uncomfortable conversation. So I told you I'm from Brooklyn, right? Now, can we talk for real? Can we keep it really real? And I hope I don't offend you, but the truth is confrontational, right? So here we go. When you look at what happens and how we have a tale of 2 cities, as politicians have said, and it's not just 2 cities, there is an underworld, there is an underground, and there's the New York City that you see in the movies and on TV, right? And we all know about the underground and the underworld. Many of us know what a ketchup sandwich tastes like and how good you can really make it when you don't have anything else, right? And so when you walk through these communities in New York City, you will see that some of the streets are as bright white as the buildings in Washington. You will see that there is a garbage receptacle on every corner and the streets are clean. And then you go into the barrio or the hood, you go into another neighborhood where there's largely immigrant populations, and you have to walk around with garbage in your pocket or your purse for blocks because there's nowhere to throw it out if you happen to be running errands or in the street. Why is that? It's because you didn't do the census. You can go into some communities and the garbage pickup You put garbage out and you're attracting rats long before you get sanitation to come pick it up. Why is that? Because we haven't done the census. You can go into some communities and the last thing you want to happen is that you need an ambulance because you got to go miles before you get to a hospital. And in other communities, you can see them cheering on the heroes and walking 2 blocks away to applaud. And you know that if you look out your window or open the window to the fire escape, you could be clapping, but they'll never hear you at a hospital because there are none close to you. You're lucky if you get an urgent care that you got to get on a bus to get to when you're feeling sick. And you know why? Because you didn't do the census. Now, Kathleen, what are you talking about? How does all of this correlate with the census? One more example. You could go to a school and your kid is in a classroom that is overcrowded, your teacher has had it and is 5 seconds off of committing themselves, which many have done, to the psych ward because they need a break, because they can't do it anymore. They can't come out of pocket anymore. And you want to know why, when then if you lied about your address, which you're not supposed to do legally, and said you lived in Park Slope or you lived in Riverdale or somewhere else, they've got like 15, 20 kids to a classroom compared to you have 32 in Queens and in Brooklyn and the Bronx and these other neighborhoods. You want to know why? Because you didn't do the census. And let me tell you why. All the census is your RSVP to what could be, should be the greatest party in the world. Living in America, living right here in New York City. But if you don't RSVP, your host is not going to be prepared for you. So there's not going to be enough bouncers. And that for us is NYPD, right? Because when the party is live, you're going to get people that crash that you don't necessarily want to see socially. But you're not going to have enough precincts. They won't be close enough for when you really need them. But when they're not breaking the law, because you didn't RSVP. When the party's really hot, the roof is on fire and you will burn down because there's not enough FDNY. There are not enough firehouses in your community because all of that is based on population. When it comes time for school, when have you ever gone to the first day of school and you see teachers clicking how many students are coming in and going, I'm sorry, Johnny, you're number 101 and we were only expecting 100. So I'm sorry, you're going to have to wait 10 years before you can come back. That's never happened. It's never gonna happen. So what does happen when you don't do the census or when you leave children off of the census, which millions of children, millions were left off the census 10 years ago. Remember, you only get to do this test once every 10 years, but the data lives annually and is revived every year for 10 years. I kid you not. You don't put a child on at 5 years old. That child's going to go to school. The school only expected 100 kids. They only budgeted for 100 kids. After a point, or if your kid transfers, that per pupil dollar amount that's budgeted no longer comes in, and all the kids have to do what my mother said all our lives: eat little and live long, right? And so we have to break it up into smaller pieces. And so the resources get stretched. They get shared because the children are not turned away. And now at 15 years old, 10 years later, you get a chance to remember to put your son or daughter on this census, on the form. And that means they've spent their entire academic career from kindergarten to a sophomore, junior in high school before we gave them the resources that they needed and the support for their academics. And education's a game changer, but we're rigging the game because we're not taking the roll call. And now let's talk about this. You want to talk voting and elected officials, but before you even get to a representative, you got to do the census. The number of seats we get in Congress and delegates to the Electoral College, if you didn't know, now you know. That is directly correlated and directly comes out of the census population data. And so just like this, just like you can lose your dinner if you walk away at dinner time, just like that, we lost congressional seats. In the late 40s, New York had 54 delegates in Congress. We are now down to the 20s for delegates for seats in the House. And right now, we've got a neighbor running Washington, but maybe not a friend. Depends on how you see it. So this is not the time. This is not the season for New York to have a smaller voice, less of a voice in Washington, that now maybe more than ever before. And this is a presidential election year. So we need to do the census. And if I haven't gotten your attention enough, when we talk about representatives, when we talk about what happens with the census, it's about 4 things. You're right. Everybody who lives, breathes in America has a right to be counted. Do not let anybody count you out. Because even though the Constitution was not written with you in mind, They couldn't do the Constitution without talking about what they were going to do about you. Okay, and we'll talk about the mess up history of the census in just a minute. But they could not, before this first census in 1790, they had to have a constitutional convention when they argued about the melanin-minded people, the people of color that they had enslaved in the country. They couldn't move forward without figuring out the problem of what to do with you and how to count you. And so when you look at the census, 4Rs, you have a right to be counted. Again, it doesn't matter what they thought about when they wrote the Constitution. It's what they brought about, that everybody gets counted. Even those of us that they considered at the first census were only 3/5 of a human being. They dehumanized us, but they still counted us. And the same is true today, except now we all count as one. So no matter what part of New York you live in, no matter what experience you're having, no matter how good your ketchup or your Spam sandwich is, or how long you wait in the line at the pantry, you count. You count the same as somebody living in Trump Towers. You count. You count the same as somebody with a condo or a co-op or a mini estate. You count. You count the same as all those people that flew and went to Vermont and the Hamptons and are hanging out and haven't even done the census yet. Don't take my word for it. Read the New York Times article that came out this weekend. And so this is what we're talking about. You all count. We all count. Whether you're a citizen or not, we count. Whether you're in the process of becoming a citizen or not, we count. If you are that person that came to visit and had a lot of extra luggage when we came to get you from the airport and was like, oh, you have a lot of bags. And you said, I'm not going back. You count because you live here, because you need the bouncers. You need the hospital. If that party gets too live that you didn't RSVP for and you had a little too much to drink or too much fun, you need the ambulance to take you to a hospital. The hospital needs to be close enough and in your catchment area. They determine that by population. The hospital needs to have enough people on staff, on duty, and they base that on population, right? And so if you don't do the census, you disappear, and so does the quality of your life for the next 10 years. So this is not, I'm not playing. This is not a joke. This is real. But let's go back to the 4Rs. The first R, you're right. You have a right to be counted. Don't let anybody count you out. The second R, resources. We're talking about money. What else would we be talking about? This is about money. What's the biggest deal in America? Money. We're a capitalist society, right? And so these tax dollars that you have been paying and your family's been paying forever, they get their money before you get yours, right? These tax dollars come back to us, but only if we do the census. And that is to the tune of $1.5 trillion annually in federal funding that the census directly impacts and informs. And we're talking for New York City to the tune of over $675 billion for roads, tunnels, bridges, hospitals, schools, after-school programs. We're talking for Medicare. We're talking for benefits like SNAP and Medicaid, but that informs it, not impacts it. We're talking about funding for anything that you are involved in that is federally funded. So we're not just talking about having a case and getting a handout, because some people have a stigma about that. No, we're talking about affordable housing, vouchers, and formulas. The census impacts $1.5 trillion worth of decision making by our elected officials. So we said money. We said resources, we said rights. It is also about representation. I told you, just like this, we lose our voice in Washington. We lose votes in the electoral college that really, real talk, choose the president, not you, but you still need to vote to empower them. And then redistricting. And this is real now. Redistricting happens right after the census. District lines are those invisible lines that are drawn all over us, right? As though we fell asleep in a party and they wrote all over your face. Those are those invisible lines. And those lines tell you if the school across the street from you is in your catchment area. They tell you who represents you in the city council, the state assembly. They tell you who your congressional representatives are. They tell you how all the decisions about you based on where you live are going to be made. Redistricting happens the second the census count is handed to the executive body in America. And we cannot miss out on redistricting, because this is where, if we lose seats, you can get carved right out of empowerment. You can be in a district right now represented by a person that looks like you, that gets it, that knows all about your community. And then that line gets drawn, and now your community is in the minority of another district where you've never heard of the guy, and he's never heard of you, and he doesn't care. And so this is why this is so important that we answer the call. RSVP, you're already at the party. You want to know why it sucks? Because you didn't do your job. You didn't RSVP. And when we look at redistricting, when we look at representation, you're concerned about whether or not you're going to vote, and that is critical. But when you get the right person in office, do they have a budget to work with? Not if you didn't RSVP. What are they going to do? Steal from this program to put in that one? So your block will get this, but they're going to be missing that. There won't be enough school books or after school programs, but maybe your pantries will keep running, so maybe you can eat. Like, what kind of decision is that? You should never have to do what too many single moms like me have had to do and choose between the milk and the cereal. And you know how you avoid that? Do the census, answer the roll call, RSVP. Don't listen to me. Talk to your neighbors. Have they done it? Have you done it yet? And sign up to get involved, because don't just talk about it, be about it. Make some phone calls with us. Drop a Dear Neighbor letter. We're going to copy. We're going to print it for you. We'll send it to you in the mail. Just post it. Put it in the laundromat. All that posting you're doing on social media, start posting about the census, because in a very few days, starting July 24, you only have 100 days to change the lives of everybody in New York for the next 10 years.
That was great energy. No, that is the energy that this nation needs.
Let me tell you some scary numbers, only because I would not be an organizer. So nationally right now, the self-response, which is what we need people to do, self-response, DIY the census, do it yourself, right? And that's the most accurate information we're going to get. Why? Because you know the best who lives in your house than anybody else. And you know you're more comfortable in the privacy of your own home, in your living room, than if you were standing in the doorway speaking to a federal census enumerator. And we know in New York City, we barely answer the door. So the nation right now is at 62% self-response. The state right now is at 57.5% self-response. The city, 53.2%. Notice these numbers are going down, right? Let's break it down by borough. In Manhattan, 54.7%. The Boogie Down Bronx, 54.5%. In Staten Island, 58.3%. They really do exist. Shh, don't tell anybody. And in Brooklyn, 50.3%, my beloved Brooklyn, I'm hurting. But in Queens, 53.1%. And 10 years ago, Brooklyn and Queens finished at the bottom, and we're holding steady. Come on, now we're the royals. We got the crowns, the kings and the queens. We need to do better. We are losing the battle before it begins. We need to do better. Do not have any more conversation with people if you don't begin it or end it with, you did the census, man? Did you do it? And here's how to do it. Go to my2020census.gov and fill it in online. You don't want to go online? No problem. You don't want to walk somebody through it on their phone? No problem. Call 844-330-2020, 844-330-2020. And they speak 14 different languages there. You got no excuse. That doesn't work for you? Go over to the pile of bills, the mail you haven't opened, dig it out. They sent you a form, fill in the form, drop it in the mail the old traditional way. You cannot go wrong doing that. When you look too at some of the neighborhoods where we have low census response, right? But high instances of COVID. Look at Corona, for example. In Corona, you had 441 deaths, 4,852 cases of Corona. And the self-response rate was 43%. That's less than half, 43%. That's a pattern we're seeing, right? When you look at Elmhurst had over 3,300 cases of Corona, 294 deaths, 53% of them have actually done the census. And when you start to look at how the census impacts healthcare, children's health insurance programs, Medicare, tons of programs for seniors, we're going to need vaccines. We're going to need testing. The numbers for that come from the census population data. How do you think the mayor and the governor knew how many beds they were going to need? How many respirators? That's all formulaic, and it is based on the population data that you and I provide when we simply do the census? I'm going to shut up. Any questions? And someone is saying here, yes, we've lost half of our delegates since the 40s. Yes, we have. We absolutely have.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. We appreciate that so much. All that great information.
I have a question.
Please.
Hi. So, my name is Tylah, and I was agreeing with a lot of things that you were saying because I have went through it. I'm from Flatbush, Brooklyn,
Go, girl.
Riverside, and I watched everything be justified, like, change before my eyes. Back then we didn't have these nice gates and these nice stuff. Now all of a sudden our rent is being raised and stuff like that, where we're being evicted, being said things that we didn't do and stuff like that to try to be evicted and to get out of our neighborhoods that we built. Now the difference between minorities and the majorities, or if you want to be more bluntly, color and non-color, is that I feel like we often, when we don't like something, we are told we got to get out of it. I'm always told you got to get out the hood, you got to get out of the hood. Now, why can't it just be that we, as the people that are in the hood, make the hood better instead of just trying to get out the hood? Because guess what, you're gonna get out the hood, but the people that you hate, the man that you hate so bad, is gonna come in your hood now and change it. And now you complain because you don't know why, because you don't want to educate yourself on why this is happening. So I really do appreciate this meeting. I'm glad that it's about the census. Honestly, I didn't do the census because I was confused on that's another thing too. I was not educated on the census. As a student, I wasn't getting no information on the census. I had to dig it in myself. And that's another issue that we have. So as you can see, I'm an anti-racist activist, and I fight for a lot of people that are from Flatbush. And I'm an artist, and I do a lot of things that have to do with fighting for the change. So I'm very interested to even work with you.
Yes.
Honestly.
Yes, and let's do it.
Right now, I had to move to Coney Island, and that's another thing too. I know a lot of people in these. I live in Coney Island by Neptune, in the west. So that's another project.
Yes.
I know a lot of people in here did not do the census, just along with me.
They did not. Coney Island's numbers are very low. Southern Brooklyn, which is where I am now. So I've lived in Crown Heights, in Bed-Stuy, and East Flatbush, and now I'm in Old Mill Basin. So Southern Brooklyn gets no attention. Is all of Southern Brooklyn is undercounted. And so I put my email and my phone number in the chat. So please holla at your girl. There is so much that you can do, that we can do together. And when we talk about the messed up history of the census, first we went from being 3/5 of a person, right? And this is for everybody that was Black and enslaved in America in the original censuses. Then we finally get, slavery is abolished with the 14th Amendment, and now we all count as one person. But still today, only 3/5 of the Black community are doing the census. Now, does that make any sense, right? So, and it's because we're not being educated about it. We're not being informed. They do not teach you this in school, okay? Been to school, bought the t-shirt, got the degrees. I was never in any classroom ever when anyone talked about the census. I had to read the form to my parents. Thank you. No, they don't talk about this. And this is why when you're not told about something, when you're not taught about it, when you're kept from doing it, when you've got people trying to scare you out of doing it, make it part of your activist manifesto that you better do it. You better save up and buy you some dirt and buy your own apartment or buy a house. You better learn to read and write, because there were laws keeping you from doing it, right? Everything that they tried to get you to stop doing or not do that everyone else could do needs to be your number one. And the information on the census is private. Why? Because Title 13, which is part of the federal statute that's never been broken, Title 13 says that your information cannot be used against you, that it cannot be shared with ICE, immigration, law enforcement, nothing, and your information does not become public for 72 years. So right now we can go back and look at 1940s And we can see Malcolm X listed by his mother as Malcolm Little, because guess what? Malcolm X did the census, okay? But we can't see any sooner because it won't come out for 72 years. So if you're in an apartment, you're doubled up, you're sharing a room, your landlord is never going to know because the census is for everybody. Everybody counts. And again, there was a fear campaign trying to scare people who were not documented out of doing the census. And whenever they try to get you to do, not to do something that everybody else can do, make it your number one goal. Be spiteful about it. Invest in your community and make sure that your community has a fighting chance by doing the census, because we're talking about money, power, and respect.
Well, one thing I feel like about over here, and I feel like it's a lot, like you said, you mentioned that people are normally they're scared or they are in fear. I feel like for me, that was one thing. I was afraid because my dormant situation, I don't know if they're going to do the census for me. I don't know if I should do the census now. I'm living with my aunt. I'm not on her lease. I know a lot of people in this type of area have people that are not on their lease. So they're afraid to put their address because now, oh shoot, you have a whole bunch of people that we didn't know living in your house. Now you're probably going to be evicted. Probably going to be your rent is probably going to be raised. You're probably not going to be you're not going to be able to pay for it. And that's
this is the one
like
time,
I said, uneducated.
Right. This is the one time that won't happen.
I didn't even know that.
Yep. It's the one time that won't happen.
I was afraid of. Right.
Yep. And you know what? What is fear? False evidence appearing real. Hey, I just need to just get real with us for a minute. Everybody talking about trusting the government. I don't trust the government to do this or do that. I am not a trusting person. I don't trust people, let alone I'm in city government, right? I'm in public affairs and have chosen to be here and be on this side of the aisle. You know, I haven't packed up my picketing shoes or my clipboard, never. But that said, you don't trust the government, but you file your taxes and get your money back. So don't trust the government, but fill in the census and get your money back into the community. And it's really that simple. This isn't about trust. This is about common sense. It's about money. It's about power. It's about respect. And it's about organizing. Now, for the first time ever on the census, after we went through all the Jim Crow and the horrible categorizations that if you had one drop of black or colored person blood in you, then you were considered black and all kind of nonsense. Now you get to say for yourself who you are and how you see yourself and how you identify. So you can not only check off your race, but you can check off your ethnicity. So I can check black and I can say I'm Haitian American. And I am adamant about saying that because my country that my parents came from and left everything for me to be the first American born was called a peephole country. And we are not. And so I'm doing some peephole country organizing and I'm checking black and I'm writing Haitian because that's who we are. We're the first black independent nation and we make no apologies for that. And I encourage you, check race and ethnicity because America is what she is because everybody except for the indigenous people came on a boat or a plane or whatever, but only the indigenous were here and can call themselves the founders. Everybody else, they came after the party had already started.
Right. And that's why I feel like also it's also important for students like me to be a part of meetings like this, because as for me, I'm a mixed child. I'm not just from one place. I am Puerto Rican, Honduras, Jamaican, and Indian. I come from many backgrounds. And I constantly study racism because I have been criticized by Black people and by white people. By all different. I have been told I'm not Black enough. I don't understand. I have been told I'm not Puerto Rican because I don't speak fluently. Yes. I have been told multiple times what I am not.
Yes. And on the census, these questions were hard won and hard fought because these questions were not always this way. So important that we do this. Now, they still have work to do on the gender question because they still only have male and female, but we continue to organize so we can rise and get the questions right. But in the meantime, fill in the questions. Do we have any other questions? Because me and you, we're not breaking up. That kind of girl you break up with, all right? So me and you, we have to talk this week because you need to be doing a lot on social media with me and amplifying what we're doing. We have a week of action coming up next week. And so I'm going to ask the host exactly. These last 100 days coming up, we have to hit hard. Usually when you start an administration or a dynasty or anything, you talk about the first 100 days. Nah, these last 100 days for the next 10 years that we get to do this, this is our time to shine. This is time, CUNY, you guys, you are having one of the best experiences. The world is listening to you. The world is looking to you because all of this work that Mr. Miranda did, that I have done, this is your time now. We have paved the pathway for you, and you can help get us on that pathway to recovery from this pandemic and the epidemic that is racism and discrimination that has always existed from the foundation of this country. Everybody's looking at you. No pressure, but for real, do the census and then stay involved. It's only the beginning.
Right. You know, like right now, this economy is opening up and they're trying to get everybody back into the system, schools and work, right? What we can't lose is the momentum. The things that make a difference, you must. Because if we go back to sleep again, if we go back to sleep again, it's waiting until somebody else dies as a result of illegal. We can afford to go back to sleep. The census is important. The census has an impact on our representation. It has an impact on what service we get in our community and the accountability and reform. Remember that. Don't let people change the conversations to things that are unconsequential. These things all make a difference. Real changes, real accountability. Everybody who's on this call can reach out to 10 more people without blinking an eye. And if any one of you, like I said, you want to run for this county committee seat, if you're interested in regards to what borough you're in, they're going to share with you my direct email, share with you my phone number. If you're interested, organize and get it. Again, I will educate you what you need to do. Empower you so that you can empower other people. Because if you're keeping the information to yourself, then we've already lost. But if you take the information and you spread it, and we're all talking to the same thing, then all of a sudden change happens because more of us are involved, we're more empowered. Again, I'm looking forward to working with each and every one of you. I appreciate the opportunity to be on this call with you. I'm about to jump into another meeting. But if there's any other questions for me, again, you have my cell phone number and you have my email. Be empowered. Do not allow this conversation to just go away and end today, right? You have to share the information with somebody else. And if somebody else hits you with 50 more questions, guess what? You get me back on the line. They said this, this, and that. And I say, okay, well, here are the answers. Give them this information, right? Because if you can speak to it like I can speak to the issue, then we are empowered. But you got to know it like I got to know it like you teach me, what you show me what you're going through. And you got to know like we teach you what we've been through and what we're still going through. Right? That's the exchange. That's the empowerment that we're looking for. So again, I'm looking forward to that dialogue with each and every one of you. So you get the opportunity, please reach out.
Thank you guys so much. Okay, so I just got the notification that the meeting is going to end again because WebEx is obnoxious. So I will restart, and then after we restart, we're going to have Justin introduce our final speaker for today's discussion. So please rejoin if you can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello guys, this is Justin McGowan again. Now, I don't really need to speak on this since it's already been said, but as one of my hosts, Kaylin Hins, has mentioned, we were expecting difficulties with WebEx again, but knowing that message, we were able to prepare to leave the event and come back to finish everything off. So even it's already known through the recording, I want to let you know that I'm sorry for those difficulties. Like, we didn't expect to have these technical issues, and we thought we were gonna make it through with no problems. But please stay with us on this one. I promise you that this will be the last time we have technical difficulties. We'll be able to finish this event with no problem. So please stick with us until the end. And also, I'd like to thank Anthony Miranda and Kathleen Daniel. I mean, Kathleen Daniel, just wow, that is great spirit. And my reaction after this recording sums it all. But I hope you enjoy. And if you had personal experience with racism and all that, please mention it down in the comments. Thank you, and let's finish this event. Okay, thank you. Well, welcome back to this event. But before I announce the final speaker, I just want to point out that Kathleen's speech is a perfect example if not the definition of the American spirit. This type of energy and this type of spirit and confidence is what we need right now. Like, we've been dealing with so many things around our nation, yet we stuck by it. We stick together, and we were able to survive everything. And if we keep doing this, then we'll be able to survive everything, and things will be back to normal. But doing the census is one of the ways to contribute to this nation. And I advise you all to please do that, and also to spread the word to others so that they all get counted. So with that said, this final speaker is the Civic and Community Empowerment Organizer at the Office of the Public Advocate, who is Letitia James. And that person I would like to welcome to this event is Hadeel Mishal.
Hi, Justin. Thank you so much for the introduction. I did want to say, though, the public advocate is Jumani D. Williams. So my name is Hadeel Mishal. I'm the Civic and Community Empowerment Organizer at the Office of the Public Advocate. So I organize across different issue areas: immigration, democracy, and the census. So when it comes to the census, we have our priorities: the Black and Brown count, the LGBTQ population, and limited English proficient groups. We have focused on those groups because they are historically undercounted in New York City and across the country, and they are often misrepresented. When we're talking about the LGBTQ community, there is no box on the census if you're a non-binary, if you're transgender. And when you feel like your identity isn't being seen, you might not want to participate in a thing. You know, I have heard people say, I don't want to fill it out because they don't take me into account. They know we exist and they don't put us on a form. And so it's really important to hear those concerns and what people have to say on the census so that we can create a more inclusive census. So I know today we're having an uncomfortable conversation. We're talking about racism and the census. So racism is a huge thing to take on, but we know that racism exists because certain groups benefit from it. When we're talking about straight, white, cisgendered men, we know that they have been in power throughout history. They're the ones who tell history. And that often when strides are made for people who are on the periphery to get rights, the laws are changed so that they can no longer access them. So once people were allowed to get the right to vote, Black people specifically, then mass incarceration started to happen, or people were getting arrested, and if you were in prison, you lost your right to vote. So how can you control a population in another way? So when we're tackling racism, we're tackling many different forms. Things change over time, but these systems are still in place. And ultimately, what we want to do is break down those systems, recreate them, reimagine them in a way that is beneficial to the communities that are left, again, on the periphery all the time. So I know for me, as an Arab Muslim woman, I've experienced racism. I wear my religion on me. There's no way I can hide it. Scarf is right here. So once I went to a predominantly white school for college is when I felt like, wow, this stuff is real. I grew up in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, in a community where everyone looked like me, where they spoke like me, where my culture was accepted and encouraged, and put in a place where people who were around me didn't know how to identify with me, where all they saw were those different elements of me. And so when we think about racism, we want to talk about how we can educate people, how we can have conversations, how we can rewrite history in a way that tells what actually happened, that tells stories accurately, that empowers other cultures. For me as an Arab, when I learned about anything that had to do with Arabs in history, it was in a very, almost, it's like we don't have any humility the way that we're taught. It's, we're barbaric, we're this, we're that, we're terrorists. You don't learn about how we have created so many different things like math, algebra. I mean, not that I like algebra, but still, it is a great tool for the world. And we don't learn about those things in history. So I think that's a huge, huge thing when it comes down to tackling racism, is learning what actually happened that led to the systems to be the way that they are now. So the census does play a role in racism to an extent, when we're talking about how certain groups are excluded. For example, again, Arabs, we are considered white. So on the census, we can put in this year, you can write in what your ethnic identity is. However, for years and years and years to be known as just white, you can't really track your community. So we know that the Arabs in the US, in New York City, don't have experiences as if they are white people, but their numbers get tracked like they are. And so when we're talking about COVID, for example, we can't track the numbers and how it's affecting the Arab community. We just know it's extremely detrimental. And we know from community-based organizations that um, communities are being decimated by it. But again, we don't have numbers to show it. And we don't have numbers that can aid us, So often when you are seeking resources, you need to have some sort of numbers to back it up. We don't have that. And so the census choosing to exclude Arabs and North Africans from the census in that way is further harmful for our community. And also lack of language access. This census has 59 languages for the language guide and the glossaries. And that's great. We should applaud that because that is an increase. However, in New York City alone, 800 languages are spoken. 600 of those are considered endangered languages. And we don't have the tools to reach out to those communities because we only have services in 59 languages. And even those, you need to know a certain amount of English to get online and access these tools that exist in other languages. They don't just exist there on their own. And so that's also something to note when it comes to the census, that although they have made strides to be more effective and more inclusive, there are still many steps to be taken so that people feel really represented and heard by the survey. And we know that people of color are the ones who are the most affected by the undercounts that happen. Brooklyn was severely undercounted in the last census and faces that same issue for this census as well. And I feel like the most powerful thing that people of color can do is fill out the census so that they could take back that money that has been historically taken away from them. You really want to screw the system? Take the money that you deserve and put it towards your schools, put it towards your hospitals, put it towards your streets, your parks, etc. And it's hard when the government has failed people in the past when it comes to the census. The citizenship question, and that was eventually not allowed, but still that caused fear in our communities that already have been under attack these past few years and have faced issues even before the current presidency. And so it is hard sometimes to instill that trust. But I know for me, I like to talk a lot about Title 13 and how it is really the highest form of privacy in this country. Not even the Patriot Act can supersede Title 13. So there really is no way that your information can get out there. It is protected, and there is a reason why that information wasn't collected. the citizenship information is not needed, and God forbid that something were to happen, that information is not going to be accessed by anybody because that hasn't been collected. And so it's really important to mention that when you're talking about the census to people who feel afraid, who feel targeted, and really validate that. Don't dismiss it and be like, oh no, that's so stupid, you didn't know that that question isn't on the census. Like, no, we're talking about people who have been historically traumatized by their government, and people who have come from other places where they don't trust the government, and that extends when they arrive in the United States. So yeah, I think that's all I really wanted to say about the census and racism. I think the people who spoke before me spoke beautifully and were able to give information eloquently, and I don't want to repeat it if it's already been said, but happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Sorry, everyone. Hi.
Hi.
Did you want to say something?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to say because I don't like the silence, so had to add in something. That was very well spoken. Like I said, I don't know any type of information about the census, and I'm getting all this information now, pretty much. And that is something that I know that my other friends have had problems with about other type of surveys, not just the census. So it's really interesting how you brought it up. And I was just thinking of how, there's a lot of things that happen in the Middle East also. And I feel like, certain things like the census, it interferes with the amount of people that know about what's going on in other people's areas, because it's like you guys have a small population. But like my great grandmother, she's Muslim. So at the end of the day, I knew this all around me, pretty much, all different types of religions. So it's very interesting how you brought that up, and I'm very happy that you brought that up too.
Thank you. I appreciate you hearing what I have to say. And I'm going to drop my email in the chat box too if y'all have any more questions about the census, if you want to get involved with that, or anything immigration-wise or democracy-wise. I work on all those issues, and I'm happy to connect and keep you guys in the loop about those things if you would like to. So I'm just putting it in right now.
Okay, if nobody else has anything to say, I want to thank you all so much for coming out. This was a great event. I'm so glad that we got to have such a productive conversation about this. Yeah, thank you so much.
Wait, Kaylin?
Yeah.
Since we basically have a little bit of time left, maybe we can have anyone that participated in this event talk about their personal experience and their experience with racism.
Totally. Anybody, the floor is yours.
I'm gonna speak, but I'm not gonna be the only one speaking. So if there's anybody else who's can.
You accidentally muted yourself again.
I want to speak about my stories, but like you said, productive conversation. So everyone that is
You're muted.
I'm sorry. Anyone who has their camera off, if you would like to speak, I'm calling you out. Speak.
I mean, racism is a very personal thing, so I understand if people don't want to share about their personal experiences with it. However, knowing how present it is and taking into account that there are actions that you can take to fight it, I think are really important. I'm actually in the car on the way to Kentucky, to Louisville, because we are going to a demonstration for Breonna Taylor. There's some, and I'm doing this in my personal capacity, but just a bunch of organized who came together, and they're like, this is unjust, and we have to do something about it. And so it's important to note that even if an issue doesn't affect you directly, like police brutality, I don't feel personally connected to it. Sorry, one second, I'm having connectivity issues. But my people don't have the same issues with the police. Ours is more with surveillance, in the Arab community, in the Muslim community. However, I understand that other people have different experiences from me, and that those experiences are very detrimental. And so whatever I could do to support and be in solidarity with my brothers and sisters, I'm going to do.
So I know that Emily has something to say. The floor is yours, Emily.
Hi, my name is Emily, and I'm an alumni of Queens College. I graduated in 2019 with a BA in Cultural Anthropology and Africana Studies. That is racism that I've experienced on campus, where a lot of students that went to school with me did not want to take Africana Studies, for example, and it was like really hard to like fight to have classes taken and to finish my major for that. So that's like one experience that I had, like at least on campus. Also in terms of like overall like personal experiences, like the one experience I want to just share about is when I was in Howard Beach. There's this couple that had an autistic son, and they wanted me to tutor him, but the capacity of the job was in actuality me being a nanny for him, but they didn't want to compensate me or call it that because I would have to ask for more pay. So anyway, I was walking back to the bus from that interview, and I walked past the firehouse, and the firehouse was primarily a lot of white men. They sexually harassed me, and then when I didn't pay attention to them, they called me a spick. And I'm Puerto Rican and Afro-Guyanese. I'm Afro-Latina, and just hearing that word made me froze. It's like, wow, they only consider me to be less than. So that's a personal experience I have.
Wow. Now that experience is really scary. Like it's bad enough that they're harassing you and trying to do bad things to you there, but the fact that they're also being racist because of that, it's just so wrong on so many levels to think that. And I advise to everyone that has experience like that, like don't listen to those people that judges you for your race or your nationality, because no matter what type of person you are, whether you're white or black or Asian or Spanish or whatever you are, you're all matter, not only to this nation but also to this entire world. And I believe that every one of you should, and everyone in this nation should get all the respect they deserve, and they should all be treated equally.
I 100% agree. Is there anybody else who wants to share? If you don't want to turn on your mic, you could put it in the chat if you feel more comfortable typing it out.
All right, I have to hop off, but thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to join you guys. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and please reach out if you're interested in partnering or working on anything with the Public Advocate's Office. All right, take care, folks. Bye.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. On that note, we could actually just end here if nobody else wants to share. Justin, if you want to lead the outros and the thank yous, that'd be great.
Sure, Kaylin, I can do that. I just want to thank all of you for attending this event. I know this is an event that we've been working on for like a month, and this is an event that we were really excited for. And it is true that racism is a big topic, and this is one of those issues, if not the issue that we need to work on to make sure it gets abolished. I mean, like, it's going to be a difficult task for us to do, and it's going to take us a while. But as long as we all stick together, work hard on the things we need to do to end racism, and to make sure that racism ends, that then we all hope that it ends eventually. This is the one main topic that I've been doing research on, since back in my high school days, and I've been doing it a lot to this day. During my times in college, I actually made several papers talking about racism and the stories and what we need to do to end this. In fact, I end up finding a solution that, if not the solution, at least one of them, ways to end racism. I feel like that the way to end racism is that we need to have racism classes in schools where we teach all the students the history of people of all races, and teach them of ways of not being racism and how to treat people equally, and what to do if you encounter someone that's being racist to someone else. I mean like fighting to end racism is a big deal for this nation. And if the host and everyone else is okay, I have the paper of that I did the project for the racism that I can put the link down in the chat for all of you to look at. Is that okay with you, Kaylin?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. Well, this is gonna take me a couple minutes because I gotta find the link there, but once I get the link together, I'll share it with you guys in the chat.
Justin, actually, we can send this all out in an email, because I will be sending out we'll be sending out emails to say thank you for joining. So that's actually good. And I definitely did share with you and Simrah and David about the survey and also my final paper. So if you're able to find it, maybe you can share that with everyone else in the emails, thanking them. Yes, that sounds great. Okay, so we'll shoot this out in an email to all of you. So thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And please, if you haven't done so, please take the census, and please spread the word about the census. This is an important time in this nation to do this, and we need everyone on board to help make changes to our nation. And also, stay safe and don't catch corona.
Thank you all so much for joining. Please continue to have uncomfortable conversations with people that you know. It's good for growth. It's good to continue talking about this, even though it might be awkward and it might make somebody upset. Because if it makes someone upset, then you know that there's a problem and there needs to be change. So, yeah, please have a great week. Stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Hello guys, this is Justin McGowan for the final time, and I just want to thank everyone for attending this event, and I just want to thank our speakers Anthony Miranda, Kathleen Daniel, and Hadeel Mishal for participating and telling us their personal experience with the Census and Racism. And I also want to give additional thanks
to Tylah Francis and Emily December for also telling about their experience with the Census and Racism as well. This is a big event that we were working on for a long time, and we are so glad that this event was able to happen. Now, at the end of this video, Kayla mentioned that she would include my final paper, that includes racism, and also the racism survey that I've done in an email thanking the participants. I don't know if she has done that yet or if she is gonna do it, but just in case she hasn't or won't be able to do that, I will include a link to those papers in the description below. I would also include the descriptions of my main channel and Kaylin's channel as well, so please subscribe to both. And I also include an organizations for you to help out with a big change related to this. I thank you all so much, and please use your census, take the census. Thank you, and God bless America.